Okay. Hopefully this stream goes well. What I'm going to cover is, I'm not sure I've done it before on stream or in a video, is I guess my understanding on how HEX actually works. That's why I called the name of the stream. How does HEX work? I guess through my own lens. Now there's more information out there if you want to dig around and have a look about the particular topics that I will break down. Now we have now I really wish I did this live on stream, but I don't have a document cam to be able to show you my scribbles. So what I've done is created some hand notes. Now they're very basic, they're very simple, but I think they're enough to understand when used with more complex tools, like mathematical formulas, like websites like this, like websites like Daily Hack Stats. And then as you piece it all together, it may make more sense. Now, a lot of people have already done this. This is nothing new. And again, everything I cover in this particular video is in an unofficial manner in regards to HEX, in regards to anything you might see on this stream. It is also not legal advice. It is also not financial advice. If this is my hobby and this is my analysis on my hobby, which I've sort of got, okay at. I haven't got the bragging rights just yet because I'm not, as I said many times, a big player in the crypto space. I do and have been following it for a long time. All right, let's kick off. Now, if you're an individual and you have, you decided you want to engage with the HEX smart contract and figure out how to get some HEX tokens. I guess this is the easiest way because there's many different entry points. Now, these entry points may confuse, so that's why I thought I would break it down in this way. How would you visually, get any HEX tokens? I guess you would break it down further and say, it's on the Ethereum blockchain. It's an ERC20. You would need to most likely purchase it, maybe with a credit card, maybe through a decentralized exchange. So that's one way. There's also, I guess, fiat would be a part of that. So that ticks that box. You may also have existing cryptocurrencies. So maybe it's Bitcoin or Ethereum. Maybe you would use services to exchange Bitcoin for either fiat to then purchase through a DEX, or maybe you would wrap it, and then exchange it that way, again through a decentralized exchange or bridges. If you had Ethereum, you could possibly swap it. Again, there's a few different ways. This is what I put in my little notes, and this is from an individual point of view. So assuming you're just purely individual, not like you're an entity or trust or anything like that. Now, just checking on the back of here, it might come through, but it should be okay to see. So we are here. Again, very simple notes, very simple notes. Might not be able to read my scribbles. Now, I guess I like to learn visually, so I would, draw a flowchart, a visual flowchart, and as I'm doing that, I can start to piece things together. I guess this is visually, internally, what I did when I first heard about HEX many years ago. When I first started listening to Richard Hart many years ago, I didn't take any notes. I just heard, listened, and tried to recall. So some of these notes, again, is purely from memory. I'm not going to go through the actual sources I use to come up with these details. So I'm hopefully saving someone else from having to do this. Who knows? or hopefully they can fact check this and point out some errors. Maybe I've got some things wrong. Maybe you know, maybe there's things that I could have explained better, or maybe you could explain better. Who knows? Maybe you do a stream of your own. Now we've got, so that's the first step, obtaining the hex. Now there's many steps before that though. There could be, you know, maybe you go through Coinbase and you haven't even got a Coinbase account, or you have to go through a decentralized account, and there's many processes to get to the spot where you either have fiat or you have cryptocurrency, or you can, you know, move between wallets. I'm assuming you understand wallets. I'm assuming you've learned how to do it securely. I'm assuming, yeah, there's a lot more to this simple explanation than meets the eye. So this should be, the assumption is, it's a very large assumption. The large assumption is you know how to use a computer, you know how to use the internet, you know, the assumption is your computer is clean, you know, you haven't got any keyloggers on your computer. There's many assumptions. That's why this video can never be used for financial, legal, or any advice. It's purely for information sharing. Now, once you've got HEX, so we leap forward. We leap light years forward, basically. What do? You can, I broke it down into two different avenues, two different directions in this particular flowchart. Now, the first one, which was one I thought of, was the most simple. Maybe it's what people would be used to if you were comparing it to, say, something like a stock, an equity. You have, you know, like a liquid stock. Maybe you've got an account, a brokerage account, you purchase it and you're holding it, and then, you know, you just sit on it. And I'm guessing you're hoping that either it pays dividends or it goes up in value or something like that. So what would you do? It's liquid. You would use it as a rock. Basically, you're using it as a store of value. It does nothing because you're not partaking in the T-share ecosystem. Not sure why you would want to do that. Again, this is an oversimplification based on an individual participant in the ecosystem. Now, again, you can see that here. We have that, the top line. We have, if we see that, HEX, liquid, and then we have here, and then we have here, and we have here. The next thing is you might stake it. You would obtain your HEX, you would stake it, again, assuming you understand how to stake it, assuming you understand how to interact with the proper correct websites, the proper correct dApps. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions here, and the content's out there, so I don't want to go over that. This is not what this is about, like a step-by-step how-to and things like that, because that's been done to death. And there's no point, you know, reinventing the wheel, because other people have done it a lot better than I have. This is my understanding of the entire system in a simple way. So if you engage in the staking system, you can then use it to obtain, well, you do use it to obtain T-shares. Now, how do you obtain T-shares? Well, if you have a look on the website of HEX, it breaks down the amount of HEX you've burned to get a T-share, or a fraction of a T-share. Now, I will cover roughly what a T-share is. Now, the T-share, once you have burned your HEX and you have a T-share, what is a T-share? Why have you got a T-share? It's basically through maths, the truth engine of the code, of the function of the smart contract. Now, again, I'm not a coder. I can't read the code. I haven't gone through the specific lines where it explains what the actual code's doing. So again, there's other videos out there, they can explain that a lot better than me. That's not what this video is for. This is my understanding to present to the world how some of my logic works. So you've engaged with the truth engine through mathematical code by obtaining hex, by burning it, by obtaining a t-share, which is what I just said. Then if you do indeed tell the truth, if you do indeed see out the days that you said you would, you will get in return new hex minted plus inflation, which is calculated on a daily basis by the system, by the truth engine. Now, backtracking all of that, question, how did the very first people get hex? If, you know, before it even existed, what was this launch mechanism? How did you get it? If you're just hearing about it, the question would be, well, if there was no, you know, existing hex, where did it come from? Well, the simple answer to that is there was an adoption amplifier whereby you were able to, over the course of a period, basically purchase your share of, now this could be wrong, basically purchase with Ethereum, I think it was only Ethereum at the time, an amount from a bucket. This is an example, not a physical bucket, but you would put your Ethereum in the bucket. At the end of the day, it would be divided up and your portion would be received into your wallet. There was the whole signature if you held Bitcoin and you were able to, what was it? Which wallet was it? There was a particular wallet you were able to sign your transaction, proving that it was your crypto. Then you were able to actually, you know, receive some hex for free. It had what was it? A stake length attached to it, where you buy, you automatically staked out for X amount of days. And hey, what's happening, Finbear? And yeah, so that was another. I actually forgot about that. I just remember that then. But that's, I guess, the original way with the adoption amplifier was through the lobby. You got the Ethereum. You put the Ethereum in, depending on the ratios on the day, depending on how much hex you would actually end up with. And at that point in time, you would then hold it, and it was up to you what you would do. Ah, cool. It's very close to Christmas. So it's like birthday, Christmas, New Year. I'm just chilling. I'm going over a basic, what is it? There's a word for these. I can't remember what they are. They're like little mini flow charts. I got a little bit bored and I thought I would create some. I thought, well, it would have been good to actually do it live on stream. I thought, well, I'll create them first, like little mini flow charts, and then I'll go over a stream how to actually do it. Yeah, man. And if anyone remembers the AA lobby, I think day 33 was the actual best day. Now I can't remember if that was calculated or how that number got mentioned, but I do remember specifically due to the volume of individuals, you know, not engaging, due to the higher number of participants in the bucket system, I guess you could loosely call it, it watered down, but your, you know, amount of hex that you would get, pun intended. But then, you know, as it not plateaued, but as the volume decreased, and then if you had to continuously put Ethereum in at the same amount, the amount of hex you would have got would have fluctuated depending on the participants, depending on how much Ethereum was put in. Now, that was, yeah, that was, I guess that was the very first way you were able to get HEX. Then came fiat, crypto, decentralized exchanges. Now, I'm assuming a lot of people understand that. Then I moved on to liquid. Basically, use case is a rock coin, and then the other use case is staking. Again, you could be some sort of somewhere in between that. Yeah, and then you could go on to, I could go on to explain ladders, because you're not just gonna take it all. You could, but you could ladder it out for one day all the way up to 5,555 days, and anywhere in between. And you could create ladders, and then it's up to you what you would do with your HEX and your inflation that you would mint, assuming you were truthful with the code through mathematics. And after you burnt your T-shares, after you burnt your HEX, you were able to get your T-share, which it was able to run the function to do the calculation. So I guess the key things in that particular note, that's a lot of words, kind of, for very few words here, was not partaking. So you would, as the individual, if you're not partaking, you're most likely going to be benefiting from price appreciation. I guess that might be your assumption. If you were staking, then as well as price appreciation, but I would say the main... Sorry, I was hearing anything moving outside. We had the hottest day here on record for the year, and it sucked. It was about 40 plus degrees, whatever that is in Celsius. Meanwhile, in the US, it's like the blizzard is going on. Heats of flights delayed. Anyway, we have the staking mechanism. If you're using it for staking, basically, yeah, you're minting HEX and minting inflation. So that's the two different use cases in my analysis. That's what I think. So that's like the first part. When you're looking at HEX, what are you going to use it for? Liquid, stake, why? And you can briefly go, where did it come from? Based on the two use cases, you're going, okay, am I partaking in the ecosphere, or am I just going to try and hope it appreciates in value and have a rock sitting in my wallet? And assuming you know how to access the internet, use a wallet, secure internet security, all that. Then I moved on to the second part, the daily calculation, because that's from an individual point of view. Now, in the HEX ecosphere, it's not just purely yourself and the code, because you're a part of a complex system. It's you and the code, which it is, but then it's someone else and the code, and everyone else and the code. And the code is like a it's like the, trying to think of that word. I'm thinking of the watering hole where all the animals go to drink, but I'm like thinking that's where all the animals get attacked and they get killed. So that's probably not the best example I can think of, but that's the one I'm imagining. So that's what I'm going to call it. But in my little picture, I called it the HEX ecosphere, so that's probably what I'll stick with. So we got, the HEX ecosphere. Hopefully that's come through. Again, this would have been good. And now it's decided to rain. So it's gone from hottest day of the year, and then tomorrow is going to be like half the temperature. Weather's crazy this year. So you're participating in the HEX ecosphere. Now, whether you're liquid or staked is up to you. What are your objectives? But I guess a good thing to point out at this point is, if you're in the HEX ecosphere, there's two things you should know. It all forms a part of the daily calculation. Now, say for instance, from 0 to 100%, and you were 0% staked, then that would mean the APY for that day, for that calculation, would be higher. Now, if you were 100% staked, and everyone else in the system was 100% staked, so that's what I meant with the last statement was, if you're 0%, if 0% was staked and no one else was staked, the APY might be higher. Now, if you are 100% staked, and everyone else who's participating in the system is also 100% staked, then I think from memory, it is 3.96% APY yearly. So it's a lot lower than we're seeing today. I guess worth noting at this point is, as a part of the HEX ecosphere, is the benevolent, the assumed benevolent, the origin address, whereby I can't remember the mechanism now off the top of my head how that functioned with the AA, but basically the origin address holds a lot of HEX. Now, what it does with it, I think you might be able to go in and have a look, assuming you know who that participant is. But the way I look at it, which I didn't even include the OA in this, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, but what I did do was say, well, you have this participant who's smaller. You have, I staggered them 369 for whatever reason. So you could assume that the, do we come on stream? If I adjust the camera, you're going to stream. The camera show? No. No. So where was I? Yeah, anyway. So that was not planned for the origin address. I should have included that. But say, for instance, the origin address, who is a large player, or say some large players in the system, you know, all staked, or they all didn't stake, that would affect how the system operates. I thought that was worth pointing out, and so too the individual. So a smaller individual, I guess, basically will have less of an effect than a larger individual on the system as a whole. But collectively, everyone could, you know, get together and all act as one. In theory, you know. If everyone, say, was felt that they wanted to participate in the staking, use it for the burn it, use it for the T-share, etc., etc., then that staking rate would increase, the APY would reduce, so the amount of inflation reward you would receive at the end would be a lot less. So yeah. Now, if that is correct, I just have to double check myself now in my mind, because I'm thinking, does that sound right? It does, yeah, because the way the system is, that if 100% is staked, then it's not going to like encourage more staking beyond 100%. So it's like, as you reach that 100% figure, the reward starts to, you know, go in the opposite, inverse direction. Thereby, it's like a self-balancing system, I would kind of view it. The next thing is the payout per T-share. So we'll move over to this one here. So this is why I thought HEX daily stats is worth having a look at. Again, most people already familiar with HEX would know what this website is, what these stats are. Briefly, I guess what they mean. The key ones that I consider, beyond like price, beyond also, I guess T-share price is a function of price, which is a function of the T-share, but the penalties are paid out to the stakers in the ecosphere. So if you hold, if there was 2 stakers and there was a payout of 2 million, everyone on that day would get, relative to their hang on, anyway. If they had equal T-share rate, then they would get a payout relative to that figure. Again, I haven't got the maths in front of me. I'm not sure I've actually done the maths, because I know there's a few places where it actually has how it's all broken down. Again, this is my understanding. This is the logical understanding. Now we have payout per T-share. So this is logical in the sense that, say you have 1 T-share staked for the 1 day, that's not like bleeding out, so it hasn't gone past its stake. So I'm not covering the good accounting function, I'm not covering the emergency end stake, and I'm not covering the, there's another one, good accounting. No, I think that's both of them. So you have this many HEX per T-share. So you as an individual, if you hold 1 T-share, which is derived, derived, which is because you staked. You used the t-chef, the staking function in HEX. You decided that's your, your logic, and then you burnt your HEX. Thereby, you have your t-chef for that particular day when you burnt it. So that's how you hold and retain your t-shares for the period of that particular stake. You then it's not even you're entitled to. It's basically that the function is run whereby it calculates who held how many t-shares. It then calculates the figure. You then get that figure. You then are able to get X amount of HEX per day. But if you were to say it's a function of how many t-shares, that's at the assumption that you tell the truth and you see the stake to the end. Because if you don't in your emergency end stake, there is a chance you might lose all of your HEX. So an effective burn when you burn it, and then so if you stake for 5,500, sorry, too many things are going through my mind right now. If you try and stake for 5,555 days, and you burn your HEX and you get 1 trillion t-shares, t-shares, get it? No, say you get 1 t-share for the next 5,555 days, you'll be eligible. You would be technically, you could say, eligible to get a payout per t-share. However, if you then emergency end stake on day 3, you would there's a good chance you would burn. You would never receive anything back, and it would be effectively burnt. So when you say you're eligible, it's not actually eligible until you mint it. And to mint it, you have to go through the process of holding. It's not even holding. You have to go through the process of waiting, of spending time. And just once that time has lapsed, the code can then calculate on a daily basis. It can then come end stake date, you can then mint your HEX and your inflation. So that is how the t-share per t-share, that's what that means basically. Now the penalties I think might be broken down from memory depending on how many individuals are staked and their ratio of t-shares held. That is the amount of penalties that's how it will be dispersed, I guess you could call it. It'll be given to those holders on that day, because it's that functions run every day through the maths, through the code. So it's not, so it's an interesting system in that aspect. So it's calculated daily, it's calculated by the t-shares, it's calculated by the number of holders, it's the number of participants affect everything, and you cannot word this. At the end of your stake is when you will know how much you'll be eligible for, because the figures can change on a daily basis. Because as time goes on, stakes may end, and the amount of t-share may increase, may decrease. So if you say, what am I trying to say here? If you look at the figure and it's estimated that you get X amount of APY return, you might get more. Maybe there's penalties or something like that. And then that can't be calculated into the future, because the penalties are a direct result of someone who, say, emergency end staked. So through their actions, they decided to not tell the truth and therefore change the future timeline relative to what was initially told to the truth engine. Hence, things can change. Now, what else? The payout per t-share rate is relative to the stakers. The penalties, so all of that, this is the summary here with a double-sided account. If you're a staker, you care about the T-share rate, payout per T-share, and you care about the penalties. If you're a holder with no stakes, everything I just said was irrelevant. You will literally be sitting on a rock coin that does nothing in that state, because you don't send it to the magical box that produces more hex, which by the way is the only way you can produce more hex, which I think is a brilliant system. You know, now that is that covered. It's very overly simplified, but I thought I would present it like that. Now, the third thing. So once you've sort of understood those things, how to get hex, what it does, what it can do, what you would care about as a staker versus what you would care about as a as a holder, the factors that you would be following as price appreciation versus inflation. Although if you're staking, you would also benefit from price appreciation, assuming that you actually don't emergency end stake. That's why it's the truth engine. There's many other things. You could also say it's someone tries to, I don't know how to word it. Say you got hacked through bad security operation or security, and they discovered that you held hex, and say the hacker, the bad actor, and they tried to access those tokens. It would actually, since they're already burnt, and the code hasn't performed the function required to be able to mint your hex plus the inflation, then most likely they would be penalized. Well, in that case, they would almost definitely be penalized unless they went. I think there's a time frame. I think it's about 50%, and unless that's changed from memory, you could, in theory, serve or see out or sit through 50% of the time you agreed upon in your own mind and your own decision when you're engaging with the contract as an individual, and you could then potentially emergency end stake, and the calculation run could potentially allow you to access the same amount of tokens that you initially burnt, but you'll be penalized of any future, how do I word it, you wouldn't be able to mint the inflation basically, and you would affect the entire system through the decision that you made, which would mean in the future state of the entire system, when X amount of hex tokens were meant to be minted into the system, they were not. That's why penalties were paid out, which is pretty good to get your head around. Again, that could be wrong, but yeah, if you had 1 million tokens and you thought you were going to get 3 million tokens, and then you sit through half your time, you then emergency end stake, right? Then you are able to, through all of the time you served and the T-shares paid out daily, would equal that initial amount of maybe say 1 million tokens. At that point, you could then mint them, but you'd be penalized. And what would you be penalized? You'll be penalized the amount that you would have earned in addition. That amount is then distributed to the stakers on that particular day, and that is how, as an individual, you will affect the entire system. Now, just saying that out loud is hurting my maths. The next thing is the T-shares. I guess the thing to know about T-shares is this here. It's that dot point. I have like 2 dot points. When it comes to T-shares, on the day when stakes are ended and the code is being run, the calculations are being done. Now, it's my understanding that it can only be equal to or greater than the amount of T shares. Then aka price goes up and to the right. Now, why does the price, T share price, continuously go up in terms of HEX, not in terms of price, because price is a different function? Because if you have a stake, now make sure I word this right, kind of right. If you have a stake, the system calculates whether or not you can create the same stake. And if the same stake, oh, hang on. Oh my God, it runs through the entire system and makes sure that no one else can make the exact same stake and get more than the amount you got with less time. So therefore, the T-share rate will only be ever equal to or greater than in that instance, which means you can only basically chase your T-shares. Because if you have, 1 million HEX and you've staked it out for 10 days, 100 days, 1,000 days, however many days, and then the stake ends. If you then go to stake that exact same amount, you would notice from what I just said, again, could be wrong, but just double check what I'm saying. You can then stake the exact same amount for the exact same period of time, but then due to the system, I guess, rebalancing, it's not even rebalancing, due to the system's T shares held and the stakes held within the system, and due to the function checking to make sure no other stake in the system can be more than that, your T share rate will be equal to or greater than. So that means, now that's confusing, but that means that your T shares, for the exact same amount of T shares, you will most likely will have to stake out longer or stake more amount of HEX to obtain the same amount of T shares, is basically what I'm saying. Which means based on that, there will come to a point whereby if you were, for whatever reason, decided to stake, say, once a year, and you wanted to maintain that exact same amount of T shares, say you were doing it for 1 day, eventually it would be 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. It would get to the point where you would need to stake that same amount of HEX out to 5,555 days. At which point you would then, that's pretty hard to get your head around because how many days would have passed, but in theory, the maths in my head says if you were to get to that point and you had reached 5,555 days with that one stake, because it's stakes throughout the entire system that it's calculating, so not just the one. So as that timeline progresses forward, these factors affect everyone, because remember, you're a part of the system. You are an individual partaking in the HEX ecosphere, as I pointed out in the particular we'll call it slide 2, vaguely a slide. Now that's with, say, a time length slider that you would be moving out, if you could imagine that visually in your mind. You could also have, say, one stake, however many HEX, however many days. Once it ends, most likely, or it would require you to put more HEX in for the same day to obtain the same amount of T shares. Now, depending on what day, how long you've staked out, depending on the payout per T share, and the penalties that took place leading up to that particular point in time, it would require you to have a higher, well, it not would require, the maths would spit out a figure saying on your screen you need to put more HEX in to receive the same amount of T share that you previously saw in a previous point in time. Now, I guess I kind of tried to describe that, but more so the time aspect. So if you have here you're the individual, and that's 0, and it goes all the way out that line, horizontal line is 5 5 5 5. Sorry, the vertical line is 5 5 5 5. Now the diagonal line going up and to the right would indicate the amount of time required and the amount of hex also required to maintain your T-share position. And when I say maintain your T-share position, it is actually, you know, an individual. So one individual's T-share would require this amount of hex to produce this amount of T-share. As the system increases, as time goes on, and others have this same T-share stake for T-shares, they've burnt different amounts of hex, they've burnt the same amount of hex to try and obtain that same amount of T-share for the same time. The system goes through, does a sweep, I guess you'd call it, and looks for an example. Once it finds that example, it would say, okay, T-shares have to be equal to or greater than, it cannot be less. So if you're getting, you know, yield of 100 hex, it would go through. If you're getting yield of X amount of T-shares, the system would go through and check. And if it's been done at a lower rate, it's impossible. It has to be equal to or greater than. So that forces, it may suggest, you know, purchasing of hex, because I guess you could you argue time's finite? But you could say, well, if that's the case, then people may purchase more hex. More hex may be required to get higher T-share rates to obtain the same T-share rate in the future. Remembering that if you were part of the staking class in hex and the stake ends and you've got more hex all of a sudden, maybe you can use that additional hex to, you know, that you've minted to create another stake, which, you know, would increase, which would be larger than your initial stake because you got more of it. And if you wanted to, you could create a similar stake, a longer stake, depending on how you want to do it, to have more T-shares. But then it gets more complex because it's like, what if you want to ladder it out? What if you have 3 T-shares? Do I just put it out for 15 years? Or do I make, you know, 1, 3, 5, 10 year stakes and trying to get T-shares all along and maintain those T-shares? So it's a very, very, I would say, complex system. Complex through simplicity. Now, the fourth section, we have this here. What's the worst possible thing that could happen? What's the worst thing? What if everyone sells? Price would go down. What would cause that to happen? No one buys, no transactions. Then if there was no buyers, so people would be, if the system state was exactly as it is now within HEX, so the assumption would be their stake's going to end in the future. Maybe I'm talking about liquidity pools, but more so just HEX by itself, just HEX. How would you generate actual fees from that through liquidity providing? If there was no liquidity providing and there was no transactions, what would the price of HEX be? Because you know the lowest it could go to, but if no one's actually trading on it and say it's dead. But the thing about that is, if there's no trades, there's no liquidity, there's no fees being earned, it just sits there stagnant. But if there's lots of trades, then there's higher amounts and the LP fees would be, you know, generated. So it basically becomes real DeFi, because what logic would it be whereby you have a system like HEX that's producing more of itself and you didn't want to engage in you didn't want to take advantage, you didn't want to make money, because you need the LPs through Hart's law to be able to make money, because if there's no liquidity, how can you buy and sell it? It becomes a rock token. There's no function. Logic to me would suggest that at some point someone would place liquidity at the band it is at to be able to sell or buy. If people did not do that, as I said before, it would be completely dead. It would be stagnant. There would be no trades, no fees. More HEX would come into existence, but there'll be no market to trade in. The next thing, who's actually buying it? Because if you were to sell it, you need a buyer, assuming there's sufficient liquidity. And if there is sufficient liquidity, who's then buying all this HEX? And then what's that HEX doing? Is it being bought up to create more HEX through staking? Is it being bought up to sit there and lay dormant? Or is it being bought up to provide more liquidity on? Or being traded through other pairs to be able to provide more liquidity on? It's just some interesting things to think about. I would argue it has brought about real DeFi. Again, it's the certificate of deposit on the blockchain, and it allows real DeFi to exist. And for someone to use HEX and then not use either the staking function or liquidity, or providing liquidity, to me makes little sense. It's not logical. As we can see, there is trades going on. We can see the price moving. At the moment, it's been going down for a long time, and I can't see why the trades would stop. Under what reason? For what reason is that logic normal? To make money, you would want trades to exist. To make money, you would want liquidity to be provided. The buyers of HEX might then decide, because this is the self-balancing system. They then say, well, I've bought all this HEX, or I'm buying all this HEX, and I'm a participant in the system. I'm either going to participate in the liquidity providing, or I'm not. And then it's going to be like, well, I'm either going to make the yield high, so I'm not going to stake, or I'm going to make the yield low and stake everything. Well, not make the yield low, but contribute to the system through staking. And then the next question. So that's a little bit of my logic there. Then the next question is, where is it? Number 5. So we've covered kind of, real DeFi. We've covered the logic. We've covered what could the buyers be trying to achieve. We've covered, I think I showed the note. Let's show the note. This is the worst case scenario. Everyone sells, price goes down. But then question mark, who's the buyer? Then I went into liquidity providing, how that may work, how participants might be engaging with liquidity providing, no liquidity providing versus high liquidity providing, what that would do from an individual point of view. Then I mentioned real DeFi, which leads me to this. The next section that I thought about was, why would anyone want to engage in real DeFi? Why would anyone want to engage in real cryptocurrency? Any cryptocurrency? The point that I'm trying to make is, if you have a look at the purchasing power, I guess I'll show you the note first. Here's the note. Whether or not you can read that writing is another question. Say you try and reduce the purchasing power of fiat currency, or to restate, the purchasing power has been reduced. It's going down in fiat. What does that mean? Over time, inflation is increasing. Now, the purchasing power of a particular dollar has decreased. However, if you have one particular US dollar in, say, a bank account in a digital format or paper fiat format, it's still one. Like, the actual amount is not shrinking. So because it's not shrinking, what could you do? That's why I chose that particular image, you know, to relate that to purchasing power, to relate that to the function of the ecosphere, which can, you know, inflate through T-shares, through burning HEX, through letting the code calculate accurately on a daily basis. And when you don't do something outside of the scope that you said you would do, you will not penalize. So come the end of your time served, the system can run the function, can run the calculation, which, mind you, you can run the function to mint, and the system can actually calculate all of this. So if you have one digital dollar, right, and you're actually seeing it be devalued in terms of the amount of things you can buy, you still hold that one though. Why then do stocks increase over time as more money was created and the purchasing power has decreased? More things have been created. Things have got more expensive. Now, as things have, items, goods and services have got more expensive, it required more of these ones to purchase through the price inflation. Now, as that happens, and if you're valuing stocks for at whatever ratio you're choosing to, you could say earnings have increased over the years. Incomes have increased, not relative to the purchasing power, but the actual number of ones is increasing. And then you see why, this is way oversimplification. Then you see why stocks are increasing. Then you see why managed funds are increasing. Then you can see what cryptocurrency can do. It is also increased. Have a look at, you know, Bitcoin from its very inception to what it is now. How many ones, once it even hit that first one, and then how many ones did it increase since that? Relative to the purchasing power of the US dollar. So as the dollar's gone down, the amount of ones have remained the same, but because due to inflation, things are getting more expensive. Maybe commodities were traded, maybe foreign exchanges were engaged with, and maybe somewhere in that legacy financial system, Bitcoin found its place, allowing it to also have more ones being required to purchase one. That is what I was trying to allude to before, when I was talking about why HEX, you know, why is everyone selling in the worst possible scenario, and who's buying? You know, it's an exchange. There is one seller, there is one buyer. Then I covered liquidity providing. Then I covered the logic as to why low liquidity would be provided. Then that got me thinking how it could be possible that how prices are set. Now, you might say, I started thinking, oh, maybe you could like pull all liquidity and there's very low liquidity, and then you have set it at some insane number, and some poor person buys that insane number. The next purchase after that would most likely be, if there's no other liquidity, very, very close to zero, because computers tend to do that. You know, they don't sort of just stay at some irregular pattern in terms of when they're counting from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. So I thought that's probably not gonna happen. And then that got me thinking, well, if you're liquidity providing and everything's sort of dependent on everything else within liquidity pools. Imagine a more efficient system where there's less fees. Imagine how much easier it would be to not control the system, but partake in the system with less pain, especially as the price is going up and down, especially if you have lots of the particular HEX or even small amounts. You might be able to engage with small, low-level yield farming in a system where there's virtually no fee and it's arguably quicker and more efficient, which is, Ethereum's okay, but it's just not feasible to run you know, a very, very complex system on top of with no fees, as we can see with HEX and the ladders that have been set up and the amount of stakes in the system, the amount of calculations required to calculate every day the penalties, also do the sweep depending to calculate to make sure no other stakes have, you know, slipped through the gap, and being able to create the same amount of T shares for a lesser amount of HEX required than previously before, you know. Yeah, so that's how the system calculates on a not an inefficient chain, but you know, that's how it works on an inefficient chain. Imagine on an efficient chain, then that leads me to start thinking about pulse chain, etc., etc. But I'll keep it simple. Now, we then have here the worst example on top of what I previously covered, you know, everyone sells, price goes down. Here's the absolute worst example for an individual after covering, you know, the purchasing power, inflation, why stocks go up, why mortgage funds, managed funds go up generally, while crypto also goes up. We have the potential that someone, an individual partaking within the system, did buy at the very top, the all-time high. Now, if that was the case, then what's happening, Ryan? What is happening? Nothing too exciting, man. Just trying to go through and present some notes, very simple notes on how, and explain my understanding of how the entire ecosphere works, and how that led me to sort of make the decisions I made based on my understanding. Hopefully that might help someone, you know, but again, we'll see. We've got the worst possible scenario. Say you bought at the all-time high. What options do you have? You can sell for a loss, lock in your paper loss. Again, not financial advice, just thinking through some thought experiments live on stream. Cheers, man. Cheers. I try. It's not the best, but I think I actually had to think about it, and I actually haven't covered much thoughts on HEX itself. Now, again, I don't want to be yeah. I just thought I'll do this basically. So you've got all-time high, and you sell. You could sell at a loss, maybe, you know, paper loss. Lock it in, becomes a real loss. I won't cover financial years, but and then the other option is you could HODL, and basically you've got to. What time is it? Oh, yeah. And then you could basically hold, and you're sitting on a paper loss. Also, the other option is you could stake, and you know, at the end of the stake, assuming you're honest to the system, runs its calculations, you could mint HEX after you've burnt it, plus the inflation, as I covered previously. Now, as I was like verbally saying that out loud and mentally thinking that through my mind earlier, I thought of this particular graph because there's probably some people, myself included, that think, oh, you know, maybe one day for no reason at all, the price will skyrocket to a new all-time high just randomly. But then thinking back through the logic, as I explained, who could be buying, how liquidity providing works, how HEX the system works, the participants in the ecosphere, how the T-share function works, how the code literally checks mathematically if it's equal to or greater than regarding T-shares, the amount of HEX required for stake daily on a daily basis across the entire system, and how participants can directly influence the system. So APY, so the more stakers, the lower the APY, the less stakers, the higher the APY. So we also covered basically what are the options when you purchase HEX and how you might get HEX. It's basically either or a rock token, which does nothing, but doesn't mean it can't appreciate in value, or you can stake it, whereby you burn it, and after the code does its thing and you interact with the code as an individual, you can then mint more HEX and more inflation. I thought of this. Now imagine if you had an opportunity, and the opportunity only presents itself once on a daily basis. You have fluctuations of price within that daily, and that is your opportunity. Now depicted it like this. So that small cross, I guess I just thought I'll just chuck it anyway. Basically all-time high. Say that was the all-time high, and that is but say that is one day, that period of time within the line. So within the day there'll be an all-time high. That is literally your opportunity. That's how time works. You can't go back in time and sell at a previous all-time high. You can you will go forward in time and analyze the system, how it works, and everything's on chain, so you will see when large stakes end, and you'll be able to say, well, maybe they're all going to dump, maybe they're all going to buy more, maybe they're going to scrape off the top. You can go through and analyze that data and try and forecast, predict what the system might do. But in the end, through that period of time, you only can do that once a day. Well, you can do it multiple times throughout the day, but the day only exists once. That's your opportunity. Now, again, then you can take into account the worst case example. You can take into account things that could happen. You could take into account your personal decisions, like whether you sell at a loss, hold, or stake. And then remembering that the code will do what the code does, remembering what chain it's on, how it's kind of inefficient, which is just Ethereum. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's HEX in a nutshell. I also covered how purchasing power, with the increasing prices over time due to inflation, that is why generally you see stocks increase and managed funds increase, and also crypto increase. But yeah, that is about it. I think I covered most of what I wanted to cover. I'll show you the notes one more time. I'll break it down, try to break it down into sections. I did cover, well, I wanted to cover this here. I guess this can be used, you can figure out how to use this website in terms of trying to decide whether or not you want to, on the day with the opportunity that presents you, whether or not you want to stake, sell, or hold. And I guess a good thing to see here is the trend for the T-share rate to increase and go up and to the right over time as the code does its thing. You'll notice that there's no decreases in the amount of T-shares forecasted. So again, you can see the code working 100%, flawless uptime, etc., etc. There's other very useful charts to go through and have a look. I won't do that today. Do check out Second Crypto Revolution, Build Generational Wealth with Richard Hart's Crypto Ecosystem. I'm not going to read it on air because, I mean, like, yeah, you can imagine why. I did cover, so I'll go through the slides just quickly. So this was just like just me brainstorming some stuff and not everything. May or may not help someone. I'm hoping I was able to relay my thoughts in an efficient way, so people were able to understand what I was actually talking about. Because the system, I would say, this is very double speak, but it's very complex, but at the same time, it can be very simple. If you limit, oh my god, it's a big ass spider. To kill that thing. Hang on, people. Oh, dude. I like spiders, people, especially not Australian big ass ones. I hope I didn't piss it off. You see me getting dragged away. It's just a spider. Oh, it's a white tip too. Pretty sure I got him. Now, where was I? Oh my god, it's so hot. I'm melting. Again, simple but straightforward. Your opportunity on a daily basis. Your decisions, options that you have. Yeah, and I guess what I will add to the end is think about what took place when I think the sacrifice phase was happening. I'm not sure if there was much selling, but there was large purchases that were taking place, and that was on a system where gas fees were still, you know, kind of annoying. So there were large purchases taking place. That was one factor, and we saw the price go up, and we saw by how much purchases were taking place. It's all on chain, so that was providing you again with potentially all-time highs depending on what day you looked at. Very similar to the if you take it all the way back to the adoption amplifier, you know, depending on what day you got in on the adoption amplifier is another similar you know, daily opportunity that was presented. Now, yeah, I could go in and say, have a look at what happened from day one of the price of the HEX, and have a look what the price is now. And if you did purchase then, would you be up? And if you purchase at the all-time high and purchase now, could you reduce your entry levels? And there's a lot. So HEX is very complex, but again, very simple. The next thing, that is about it. Yeah, the liquidity pools, I think, are worth knowing exist. Again, you can see all on chain. All on chain. All on chain. The thing that could have stopped, you know, the thing that could have stopped all this non-on-chain data happenings was the on-chain data that exists with liquidity pools, you know. Although this one doesn't have much fees at all. You can have a look at HEX itself. Now, I'll make another stream later which will be more, I guess, freedom orientated. More leaning towards freedom of speech and things that can help bring about freedom of speech. So I won't cover that today. I'll basically end with this. I won't cover in much detail, but this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then of course this one. Now I'll put the links in below, but I'll cover that all on another stream. So tune in if you want to check that stuff out. Thank you for anyone who tuned in and watched. If there's anyone here, thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for checking us out. Not much new really. It's more just some, again, I guess it's HEX from my perspective. Now there's some other things I could talk about, but I won't, because again, I thought if I make it from notes, from simple slides, I'll be able to break it down a bit better. But what else? Can I say something? Can't remember. Yeah, again, don't want to tell anyone what to do. Don't want to promote nothing. I just want to say how much, I should turn the filter off, but how much I love this thing HEX. How much I think this is going to attribute to my freedom. How much it's given me back some of my time. Although the price is going back down. That's all good. We must be on the other side of the world. But then, yeah, just how much it's been able to give back some of my time, even though the price is going down. How far it's come, how much it just keeps doing what it said it would do, and how I do think that in the next bull market, if everything's pumping, maybe something like HEX might pump, and as the old saying goes, it could melt faces. Because for the longest time, I never thought 1 penny was within reach. For a long time, I thought over time it would naturally do its thing, would ratchet up. Then once it hit its all-time high, it blew my mind in terms of expectations and time frames. But also, it probably affected people's psyche in terms of thinking it will keep going up. Then when it didn't, it pulled back to normal parameters, normal ranges, potentially based on other factors not happening or factors that were happening. Maybe that affected people's, like I said, maybe that affected people's psyche. But other than that, I think HEX is going to keep doing what it's doing as its new factors, new variables introduce themselves into the ecosphere. Maybe, just maybe, it'll do its thing again and again and again. I better go because my missus is about to shoot me.